Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NBA Front Office Show. Appreciate all of you joining us. The Brooklyn Nets, shockingly, eliminated from the NBA playoffs. Injuries knocked them down. Kyrie Irving, James Harden both suffer injuries, and the Nets are now out after falling in Game 7 to the Milwaukee Bucks. But what does that mean for two of their top free agents? There's a lot going on still in the world of the Nets. We're going to break it down. But first, make sure you do subscribe right here to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. And don't forget to turn on notifications as well. As you guys know, we're just getting this rolling, so certainly appreciate it if you would subscribe. Joining me as always is Keith Smith. Keith, how are you doing? And how surprised are you that the odds-on favorite to win the NBA title is now going home?
Yeah, it definitely surprising. This has been the playoffs of unpredictability. Everything we thought we knew coming in, a lot of it didn't come to fruition. I picked, I feel fortunate. I picked Clippers Nets, so I still have one of my two teams hanging in there, but they lost earlier this afternoon as we're recording this on Father's Day Sunday. Happy Father's Day to any of the dads out there. Probably belated at this point, but we appreciate you nonetheless. But yeah, very shocking that it went down. But Kyrie Irving out. James Harden was clearly not James Harden. They were down to it, and both Milwaukee and Brooklyn, two teams that we felt really good about, I think, all year long. By the end, we're playing like their starters 50 plus minutes in an overtime game.
Crazy.
It was like nobody, like neither team. Yeah, Pat Connaughton was the only guy in Game 7 who took a shot off the bench for either team. So kind of interesting
Unreal.
there, and maybe for the Nets it might have gone different if a guy we're about to talk about was available for them, Spencer Dinwiddie.
Yeah, so that was the big news, right? I mean, a lot of people were kind of shocked, right, that this news came out. Spencer Dinwiddie already making the determination that he is opting out of next year at a player option for just over $12 million for next season. But
And let me interrupt you for a second. Oh, go ahead. You probably have a reason.
There's a reason for that. This doesn't happen very often, right, Keith? But he only had 2 days to make that decision.
That's it. You're on it. Yep. Yeah. You only had 2 days. So that's the second option decision we've seen now. Alfred Kaminu was the other one he picked up as option. No surprise there with the Chicago Bulls. Dinwiddie going the other direction. Anybody who's been paying attention all year should know Dinwiddie said, I'm going to opt out. It makes the most sense for him. He was coming off but what I call it the Dinwiddie, right? That was the extension he signed when he could have been a free agent, but he, re-upped, and that's the early extension where you get the the raises off the average salary, and then a bump off of that, and then the raises off of that. So he locked in for that pretty early on. Stayed there with Brooklyn through kind of their come up, I guess is the best way to put it. And then what was, it's going to be a big part of this year's team, as they had Irving and Durant and then traded for Harden, but clearly, partial ACL tear. From all accounts, sounds like he's doing pretty well, should be ready for the start of next season to go. We see ACL tears aren't what they used to be. Guys come back pretty much at full strength. For him, the unfortunate thing is this is his second one. So we'll see. But yeah, right decision for him to opt out, because this is his probably last chance at a really big contract, and as far as the free agent class goes, not a strong one. So definitely he'll be one of the better guards out there on the free agent market, because he can both play on and off the ball, even if he's probably still more of a lead ball handler than an off guard.
So let's say for a moment that the Nets decide we want to bring this guy back. What is the reality for that? And by the way, guys, we're going to get to Bruce Brown in just a bit here. That's where we're going next after this. But for Spencer Dinwiddie right now, what can the Nets do in order to bring him back, and how costly will it be to do that? He did an interview a couple of months ago where he mentioned 20 to 25 million is what he expects a starting point guard to get, and that's what he sees himself as. So, I mean, then the Nets have a pretty hefty bill here in terms of salaries already.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start there. So the Nets already on their books for next season, as I do some quick math here, just with their guaranteed salaries on the books are at, let's see, they are at 100. What's that?
I was going to say the cap is at 112. So whatever number Keith throws at you here, keep in mind,
it's going to be
the
a
cap
big
is
number.
112. So the Nets are at
158.8 million. So in the tax line is 36 million. So they are 39 million over the tax line already, going into next season. So it's is that right? Oh, I apologize. Let me go back. I said the wrong number. It's, well, I guess if they renounce Elise Johnson and they dump their first round draft pick, some things they're probably not going to do, or waive Elise Johnson. They'd be at one. So let's use that 158.8. Well, let's give you the number that they could absolutely be down to. So that's that works out to what, 22.2 million over the tax already. And that's just for their guarantees. And the reason for that is, here's your big numbers, right? Kevin Durant, 42 million. James Harden, 44.3 million. Kyrie Irving, 35 million. But then you've got Joe Harris, 17.3 million. DeAndre Jordan, 9.9 million. Landry Shamet last year, his rookie scale deal, 3.7 million. And then to close it out, Nick Claxton's the bargain of the group at 1.8 million last year of his 3-year minimum deal that he signed as a rookie with the Nets. So that's why you're sitting there. So that's before re-signing Dinwiddie. That's before re-signing Bruce Brown. That's not doing anything with Jeff Green, Blake Griffin, a couple guys who were key parts of their rotation. Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot fell out, in the playoffs, but again, another guy who was a really key depth piece for them. Mike James, who they re-signed for the rest of the year, became a key rotation player. That's without him. So that's, we were talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players under contract for almost $160 million. So that's expensive.
So for everybody that's been hitting me up asking, how is this legal that the Nets have 3 max contracts on their books? Look, it's a soft cap for a reason. They've figured out a way to make that happen. And that was all legal, right? It's not like they broke any rules to do this, but there's going to be a price, and it is going to be a hefty price to pay in terms of the luxury tax in order to keep this roster together. Now, Spencer Dinwiddie, they'll have his bird rights. They can exceed these numbers to go and keep him. But I mean, the cost is going to be astronomical in order to hang on to him in terms of tax dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into that just a little bit more. Everybody always brings up to me, isn't there a hard cap? There is a hard cap, but only if you're subject to it. The 3 ways you become hard capped: acquire a player via sign and trade. Nets have not done that, will not be able to do that because they're already over the tax apron. So that's not even open to them. Use the biannual exception. Again, won't be open to the Nets because they're over the tax apron. If you start out over the tax apron, those things you can't even do. You're not even allowed, because that closes the loophole of getting around the hard cap. Or you use an amount of the non-taxpayer mid-level that's equivalent to the taxpayer mid-level, because again, if you're over that tax apron, you're limited to the taxpayer mid-level. So the net spending power is limited to just the following: the taxpayer mid-level exception, that's about 5.9 million. For them, that has a ton of spending power, because that's a ready-made title contender. Even if they lost in the second round this year, any vet who's like, you know what, if I could get 8 to 10 million a year, I'll take your 5.9 million for 1 year and sign on. And then after that, it becomes things like trades, sign and trade with Spencer Dinwiddie, if maybe that's the direction they wanted to go to bring in talent. Because if you sign and trade a player out, that doesn't hard cap you. It's only acquiring a player via sign and trade. So that's how they can go so far over. So let's talk Dinwiddie, right? You mentioned he said 20 to 25 million. That seems like maybe a little steep to me. I don't think he's going to get there.
For a guy coming off an ACL.
That's it. But he's not a dumb guy, right? He's making 12.3 million, or would have made 12.3 million on that player option. So Spencer Dinwiddie knows he's already probably right, wrong, or indifferent. Scream tampering all you want. Agents talk. They know he's going to get something more than 12.3 million. Otherwise, he would have opted in. Or he's at least going to get a salary that starts at that and then goes for years. So what we're going to see with Dinwiddie is, my guess is something that's more in the 15 to 17 million starting salary, maybe even 17 to 20. Maybe he gets 18.5, something in that range there, and that's what he's going to get starting salary. Now, if I was the Nets, this is what you've probably heard referred to as the bird rights trap. I know we talked about this with Dennis Schroeder in the past. fast. That basically what that does is that pins you into thinking the only way to keep this guy is because you have his bird right, so you have to re-sign him. Well, if you're the Nets, that gets very expensive, right? They're already going to be in the highest levels of luxury tax that they can be. I've not had a chance to figure out what that number will be, but we'll know it by the time we they finish up their offseason. But so that becomes tricky. So I start to wonder if you're Dinwiddie, you want to be a starter. That's probably not going to happen in Brooklyn, right? Because you've got Harden and Kyrie there in the backcourt. And if you want to get paid like a starter, your best bet may be to pursue something elsewhere. One of the cap space teams, maybe. The Knicks just crossed town.
The Knicks, they've got all that space.
Exactly. And if you're the Nets, maybe what you're looking at there is, all right, if he goes to a cap space team, do what the Celtics did with Gordon Hayward. Make it a sign and trade where if you're the Nets, you give up a couple second-round picks as the payment for the other team doing it as a sign and trade, and you create a giant trade exception, which then you can use to flesh out your depth, bring in one player, however you want to do it if you're Brooklyn. Because my guess is, going back to a full 82-game schedule, we're going to see the Nets be very, very, very cautious with Durant, Irving, and Harden and not push them overly hard throughout the regular season. My guess is all three of those guys, barring a real serious injury, will top out around 60 games or so. That's maybe 65 in that range, maybe 70 on the high end. But that's kind of my guess is they're going to do everything they can. So at that point, if you don't want to be super expensive if you're the Nets, you could use Dinwiddie by trading him out via sign and trade to go fill out your roster. You could maybe get two players for him, or you could get a really good player, or like I said, you could create that giant trade exception there for whatever value he signs for, if it's straight up with a cap space team, because it's either going to be a sign and trade or he just stays in Brooklyn. Maybe he's content to say, I'll be the sixth man, because if I remember right, wasn't Steve Nash talking about, hey, you can be our Manu Ginobili?
Yeah.
At one point in the year and those kind of things. And you know what, if you're Dinwiddie, if you're playing 25 to 30 minutes a night off the bench on a really good team, that's basically the same as starting. You could probably maybe even be in the sixth man of the year running. And he may start plenty too, because again, I think they'll be cautious with those guys next year in the regular season. So I wouldn't rule them out coming back. It just gets so expensive for them to do that.
And that's just it, right? Like, they like him. They would like to keep him around, but the NBA put these rules in for a reason, in order to make it especially painful to try to keep that many big contracts together. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there. And then they've got a guy on a bargain in Bruce Brown, who, I mean, look, he took on a huge role for them in the playoffs. You saw him getting the bulk of the minutes, and yet he was on a minimum contract. That is obviously going to change. He's not looking at a dollar amount anywhere near what Spencer Dinwiddie is talking about, I don't think, here in free agency. No. But this is another guy that they've got to make a tough decision on, to where this net salary is just going to keep going up and up and up. I still look, if they were healthy, I think at the end of the day, they're hoisting the NBA championship, right? If they were healthy, I think they're getting past the Bucks. I think they're probably winning the whole thing. So they might be able to talk themselves into paying this much, just saying this is a championship caliber team. I think certainly with the 3 stars, it definitely is, and you have to have a supporting cast around them. But still, to go from a veteran minimum deal now for Bruce Brown to something considerably more, given the tax penalties that are going to be involved there, it wouldn't shock me if they had to make a very tough choice here, and if he winds up maybe somewhere else.
Yeah, and let's look at his season as a whole, right? He showed very great versatility, can do a lot of different things as far as being a on-ball guy and off-ball guy. They played him as a pseudo 5 at times, as a role man in their offense and all those sorts of things. So I think what you're kind of looking at with Bruce Brown is, I think there might be a team out there that's willing to give him their mid-level exception at least, which is, that's almost 10 million. Let's just call it 10 million for the sake of easy math. Right. So if there's a team out there willing to give him that 10 million, then what that becomes is, all right, if you're the Nets, because he's a restricted free agent, they will 100% issue him the qualifying offer. Because he met starter criteria, his qualifying offer bumped up from a minimum qualifying offer up to $4.7 million, which good for him, right? That's why it's there. So those guys are a little more protected. That's the same boat that guys like Devontae Graham and Gary Trent Jr. Are in this year. These guys who were second-round picks that outplayed their deals by becoming starters. So what we're going to see with them is they'll issue that, and then the Nets gives them the right to match any offer that he gets that's reasonable. As we know, if you want to get a player in restricted free agency, you generally have to overpay them. So maybe a team would say, you know what, we'll go to 12 million or something along those lines, because we think Bruce Brown can come in and be this really great, versatile, fifth starter for us and do all these different things like what he did for the Nets. And maybe that's where this goes. My guess is what we're going to see with the Nets is it's going to be one or the other. It's going to be Brown or Dinwiddie, but not both. And what's going to be important is how they structure the exit of either one of those players, because I don't think they're in a position where they can afford to just lose them straight out. Just let them sign somewhere else and off they go. I think you have to try to structure it as a sign and trade, bring back players or bring back just at least tradable salary that you can move in a future trade, because losing them for truly nothing, that starts to really become tough, because you're going to take a major depth hit there, because you can't replace them with an equivalent level player. That's even knowing they're going to fill out the last couple of roster spots with good veterans on the minimum, because that's they're that good of a team.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to have players who want to play for them. The guys who are lining up to go and join up. I mean, look, like Blake Griffin, like LaMarcus Aldridge, who unfortunately didn't get to finish the season out with them. But they're going to have guys that are willing to go there. But I do think you're right. I think it's going to come down to one or the other. So let's look at that. Push comes to shove. Which one do you think the Nets would prefer sticks around between Dinwiddie and Brown?
I think Brown. And that's Dinwiddie is the better player,
yes.
Assuming health and all those things. But I think it's Brown. I think he fills more roles for them without being a guy who needs the ball a lot. He's going to do a lot of things, and I think for Dinwiddie, the opportunity to go somewhere, play a bigger role, probably be a starter for another team, I think that's going to be a draw, and you'll be able to get more for him if you structure it as a sign and trade, even if it's just a sign and trade to create a giant trade exception. That's better than anything that they would be able to do for Brown. So I think for that reason, that's where we're at. And then what you do is then you focus on using part of your probably part of, if not all, of your taxpayer mid-level in the minimums to try to keep Blake Griffin around, because Blake was great for them.
He was.
Try to get Jeff Green back in the fold again. Jeff Green, this would, I want to say, be his 5th year in a row playing for the minimum somewhere. So we'll see if that holds up, if that's what he wants to do. But yeah, those are the things you got to kind of look at if you're the Nets, because this can't be a decision where it's just going to be there. And I get it that they have one of the richest owners in the league. I fully understand that. That's even after transitioning from Mikhail Prokhorov to Joe Tsai. Joe Tsai is still one of the richest owners in the league, but every ownership group has their limits. They're not going to pay an insane amount of money. Even Steve Ballmer, the richest owner in the league, has a point where it's like, all right, what are we doing here? So yeah, so it's tough. They'll be okay. I'm not, by no means am I trying to paint this as the Nets are going to be in trouble. Yeah, they're going to be fine, and they'll be right back in the mix for the title next year. But what I think you need to do is you need to protect yourself to have a little bit more depth, because as we saw, if something bad happens, it gets rough for you, pretty quickly.
Absolutely, and that's the nature of the beast. When you build a team that is this top heavy, look, we saw it with the Lakers too. When you build a team that's top heavy, that's built around stars, which stars tend to win championships, not saying anything against that strategy, but when you do that and injuries hit, you can find yourself in trouble pretty quickly in terms of being able to soldier on. Whereas some teams are able to withstand a blow to a starter because they have more depth, because they don't have such a top-heavy team, right? So just a difference in building strategy. But now the Nets are going to have a little bit of a tough decision to make here. But again, I expect this team to be one of the favorites, certainly to win an NBA championship next season. But
absolutely,
I think that all sums it up fairly well. Any final thoughts on the Nets moving forward now that they are bounced out of the playoffs?
Yeah, I think it's important. I've seen some people say they don't really need their draft pick, and yeah, if you could move it in a trade to bring in somebody who's a veteran, that's an upgrade, right? Because you're trying to win in the next couple of years. That's really important. But getting just one cost controlled young player on the team because Shamit and Claxton are at the end this next year. That's the end of their deals. So now you're into extension territory with both of those guys or new contracts the next offseason. Getting one more cost-controlled young guy on the roster, I think that's kind of big. And then you'll fill out. And this is, as I've said, with the Lakers, the Clippers, these other teams that are top-heavy with salary commitments, this is not the worst year to be in that position, because what's going to happen is the cap space teams are going to spend it very quickly, followed by the exception teams. So there's going to be a lot of quality veterans who can really still play that are going to be out there looking for veteran minimum jobs, and they don't take veteran minimum jobs with the Orlando Magic, who are rebuilding. They're going to take those with championship contenders. So I think we're in a pretty good position to see that come together.
All right, I agree. I think it's going to be a really interesting offseason for the Nets and for a lot of these teams that are at the top, and we'll see how it all plays out. But everybody give us your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think happens with Spencer Dinwiddie, with Bruce Brown? Who should the Nets prioritize? And how about this luxury tax bill that they're about to see? It could get pretty costly for them to keep this squad together. But give us your thoughts in the comments down below. And don't forget, subscribe right here to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. Till next time, see ya and stay safe.